For episode 3, I'd planned by the end of the video to have successfully removed the flywheel. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened, and I wanted to put this video out there in the hope that I can find out why. I think it's one of 3 possibilities. 1. User error on my part. 2. The Minisport Puller just isn't fit for purpose. Or 3. The flywheel has cold welded itself onto the crankshaft. The job's been made much more difficult as well by the fact that I'm also filming woodworking videos on YouTube and trying my best not to get everything covered in wood shavings, so I'm having to constantly tidy up all the time and I'm struggling for space. One thing I did since the last episode though was get everything boxed up and labelled so all the parts associated with the head are now all together in one place. So here's what I did to try and remove the flywheel, and hopefully if I share the video to the relevant groups I can find out exactly what went wrong. So the first job was to take plenty of pictures for reference for later on in the build. I'd left this engine mounted on, so this had to come off first. Then in a flash all the bolts for the cover were removed and I labelled them up as some of them were different lengths. With a bit of a tap the cover comes straight off. Now if you know your engines you'll know instantly that this is a prevert or clutch. Removing these 3 bolts gave me access to the nut that secures everything to the crankshaft. To remove the nut I've got to first peel back the locking tabs, then it's just a simple case of removing the nut, or not as the case may be. But after several failed attempts I came up with a better plan. I wedged it between the floor and the lathe. At the time I was actually on the phone to Paul Jeffries and he sort of put the idea in my head and it worked a treat. The lathe is really heavy and wedged properly it wasn't moving anywhere. I say wedged properly because as you'll see later on when the wedges slip the engine does move. Anyway I wedged the flywheel teeth and this enabled me to easily remove the nut and locking tabs. I turned the engine round ready for fitting the pulley tool and removed the key slot washer or whatever it's called. The puller I'm using here is Minisport's heavy duty puller. Now it looks solid, but as we'll see in a minute it's not as solid as it first appears. But I test fitted everything first, lubricated the threads and made sure that everything aligned perfectly. Now from here I followed the Haynes manual instructions. People were telling me to heat it, cool it, whack it, don't whack it, hammer from behind and so on, but it was confusing knowing what to do and what not to do, so I just ended up following the book. At first things seemed to go pretty well. Everything was tightening up and I was tapping as I went along. Apparently when removing the flywheel the engine should be at top dead centre, or alternatively the slot on the flywheel should be horizontal, leaving the pistons all lined up halfway up the cylinders, and this is to prevent an issue with a washer behind the flywheel causing problems. So I'd followed this advice and I carried on trying to get the flywheel off, but I noticed the puller suddenly bent, along with the washers, and the thread of the puller stripped. As you can see in the video I'm not even putting much pressure on the bar yet, and the puller just warped and twisted. The metal seems that soft that the nuts have eaten into the thick puller. Now I'd expect the thin bolts to be the weak point, but surprisingly it's a thick piece of metal of the puller, and the thin bolts looks like they've been untouched. So even if this is user error, you would expect the thin bolts to go before a 3/4 inch thick plate. Now I spent ages on this, and eventually the puller became unusable as it was twisted and it's lost all its threads. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Was my technique incorrect? Is the puller just simply not fit for purpose? Or could there be another factor in play, like the flywheel cold welded itself to the crankshaft? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. I know there are better pullers out there, but my worry is that if there's another factor at play and the new puller doesn't work either, I'll have wasted even more money, and that may leave me with just one choice. Prior to making the videos on YouTube, I worked as a firefighter for nearly 20 years, serving my community and helping to save lives and promote the fire safety message. Unfortunately, an accumulation of many upsetting scenes became too much for my mind to cope with, and after years of failed therapy I was retired from the service on the grounds of ill health and signed off medically from any employment. To keep myself busy, both body and mind, I developed an interest in woodworking and car mechanics, and with already having a hobby in filming and music, I combined my interest and started making videos here on YouTube, filming, editing and composing my own music for my woodworking and car restoration channels Smugwood and Smugwood Mini. Unfortunately, to produce such videos comes at a price, and with minimal funds after being retired from employment, I've turned to Patreon to see if there is additional support out there which could allow me to continue making the woodworking and car restoration videos. In return for support, there are various levels which are explained in more depth at the Patreon link below, but includes the chance to win one of my YouTube projects made throughout the year, and also inclusion into random prize draws open to patrons only. In addition, I'd like to thank everybody who already subscribes to my channels, or watches, comments, likes and shares them, as it all goes to help support my channels, and for that I'm really appreciative. It's my hope that I can continue making the videos for the foreseeable future. Thanks once again for your continued support.